before history had emperors, before Egypt raised the Great Pyramids, before the first dynasty ruled along the Nile, there was a land where humanity crossed an invisible line. It was a place with no forests, almost no stone, and very little metal. The summer heat was relentless, the rivers were unpredictable, and survival seemed almost impossible. Yet somehow, against every odd, people transformed this unforgiving landscape into the world's first great civilization. They built the first true cities. They developed the first writing system. They created organized governments, schools, taxation, large-scale engineering, and a society so advanced that many parts of modern life can trace their origins back more than 5,000 years. But here's what most people never learn. The Sumerians were never one unified empire. They didn't invent writing to tell stories. Their greatest enemy wasn't a foreign conqueror, it was themselves. And in the end, the same innovations that made them powerful also helped bring about their collapse. This is not the story of myths or legends. It is the story told through thousands of clay tablets, excavated cities, archaeological discoveries, and decades of scientific research that continued to reshape our understanding of humanity's earliest civilization. If you enjoy documentaries that go beyond the textbook and reveal the forgotten truths of history, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we uncover real stories hidden beneath the ruins of the ancient world. Now, let's travel back more than 5,000 years to the birthplace of civilization. Our story begins in southern Mesopotamia, a vast plain located between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, this region lies mostly within modern Iraq, but thousands of years ago, it looked very different. Unlike Egypt, where the Nile flooded in a fairly predictable cycle, the rivers of Mesopotamia could be both generous and destructive. Floodwaters often arrived unexpectedly, washing away homes, fields, and entire villages. During other years, drought left the land cracked and barren. The environment presented another enormous challenge. There were no nearby mountains filled with stone for construction. Forests were almost non-existent, leaving little timber for buildings or tools. Valuable metals such as copper and tin had to be imported from distant lands hundreds of miles away. By almost every measure, southern Mesopotamia seemed like one of the least promising places on Earth to build a civilization. Yet these harsh conditions forced people to think differently. Instead of depending on nature, they learned to control it. Long before massive monuments appeared, communities began digging irrigation canals that carried river water across dry fields. They constructed levees to protect settlements from floods and reservoirs to store precious water during dry seasons. These engineering projects required hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people working together under organized leadership. Cooperation became essential for survival. This was one of history's greatest turning points. Agriculture became far more productive than before. Farmers produced more grain than their families could consume. That extra food supported craftsmen, merchants, priests, administrators, and builders. For the first time, not everyone needed to farm. Society began to specialize. Over generations, small farming villages slowly transformed into bustling urban centers. Among the earliest was Eridu, a settlement many archaeologists consider one of the world's oldest cities. According to later Sumerian tradition, Eridu was the first city ever founded by the gods themselves. While that claim belongs to mythology, archaeology tells a remarkable story of continuous human occupation stretching back thousands of years. Layer upon layer of temples were built upon the same sacred ground, each new generation constructing larger buildings directly above the older ones, preserving an unbroken record of religious life unlike almost anywhere else in the ancient world. Not far away, another city was beginning to grow into something extraordinary. Its name was Uruk. Today, many historians consider Uruk to be humanity's first true city. Around 3500 BC, while much of the world still consisted of scattered farming communities, Uruk had expanded into a vast urban center covering hundreds of acres and housing tens of thousands of people. Its skyline was dominated by monumental temples made from millions of mud bricks. Workshops produced pottery on an unprecedented scale. Markets buzzed with merchants exchanging goods from distant regions. Boats crowded canals carrying grain, fish, textiles, and construction materials through the growing city. Life inside Uruk was unlike anything humanity had experienced before. As populations increased, governing the city became far more complicated than simply remembering who owned what or who owed taxes to the temple. Grain harvests had to be measured. Workers needed food rations. Livestock numbers had to be recorded. Building projects required careful planning. Trade agreements stretched across hundreds of miles. Memory alone could no longer manage such complexity. This challenge led to one of humanity's greatest inventions. Most people believe writing began with stories, poetry, or religious teachings. The truth is far less romantic and far more fascinating. The earliest Sumerian writing had nothing to do with literature. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of clay tablets from this period, and almost all of them contain simple administrative records. They list barley deliveries, sheep inventories, worker attendance, beer rations, taxes, and temple supplies. These early symbols were created for one reason: accounting. Imagine a temple receiving thousands of baskets of grain from surrounding farms. Without a reliable system, mistakes, theft, and confusion would quickly become inevitable. So scribes began pressing reed styluses into soft clay, creating symbols that represented numbers, goods, and eventually sounds. This writing system, known today as cuneiform, would evolve over centuries into one of the most influential scripts in human history. Hidden among these ordinary business records lies another astonishing discovery. On one humble clay tablet appears a name, Kushim. No king, no famous warrior, no legendary hero, just a person involved in recording deliveries of barley. Many scholars believe Kushim may represent the earliest known personal name ever written down anywhere in the world. Think about that for a moment. The first individual whose name survives in written history was not remembered for conquering nations or building monuments. He, or perhaps an official using that title, was simply keeping financial records. Humanity's earliest written signature emerged not from glory, but from bookkeeping. As cities expanded, another institution became the heart of Sumerian society: the temple. Modern people often imagine temples as places used only for worship, but Sumerian temples were something far greater. They functioned as the economic engines of their cities. Vast storehouses held grain collected from surrounding farms. Workshops produced textiles, pottery, tools, and luxury goods. Thousands of workers labored under temple administration. Priests supervised agricultural lands, organized construction projects, distributed food, and maintained detailed financial accounts. In many ways, a Sumerian temple resembled a combination of a government office, warehouse, bank, school, factory, and religious center all operating under one roof. This system allowed cities like Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Eridu to grow rapidly. But as each city became wealthier and more powerful, another problem began to emerge. None of them wanted to share that power. Instead of forming one united nation, Sumer developed into a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Each city had its own ruler, its own patron god, its own army, its own economy, and its own ambitions. Cooperation built civilization, but competition would soon shape its destiny. And that competition would transform southern Mesopotamia into one of the most innovative, prosperous, and surprisingly dangerous places on Earth. Right, Part 2. The rivalry between Sumer's city-states was unlike anything the world had seen before. Every major city believed it existed under the protection of its own patron deity. Uruk honored Inanna, the goddess of love and war. Nippur was the sacred city of Enlil, the powerful god of wind and authority. Eridu revered Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. The people did not simply believe their gods watched over them. They believed their gods owned the cities themselves. Kings were not considered divine rulers in the earliest periods. Instead, they governed as representatives chosen to manage the gods' earthly possessions. This belief shaped every part of daily life. A successful harvest was seen as a blessing from the gods. A flood could be interpreted as divine anger. Victory in battle proved that one city's god had temporarily favored its people over another. Religion was woven into government, economics, engineering, and even agriculture so completely that separating faith from politics would have been impossible. Despite their differences, the cities shared one remarkable achievement. They created some of the world's first organized urban societies. Walking through a Sumerian city around 2500 BC would have been an unforgettable experience. Narrow streets, twisted between mud brick homes, donkeys carried baskets loaded with grain and pottery, merchants called out prices in crowded marketplaces. The smell of freshly baked bread mixed with smoke from kilns where potters fired thousands of clay vessels. Temple workers hurried between warehouses carrying records written on wet clay tablets. Children chased one another through busy alleys while fishermen unloaded their catches along canals connected to the Euphrates River. For the first time in history, tens of thousands of people lived together in one place, creating problems that required entirely new solutions. One of those solutions was bureaucracy. Today, the word often sounds boring, but bureaucracy was one of Sumer's greatest inventions. Without it, cities of this size simply could not function. Every shipment of grain, every herd of sheep, every construction project, and every worker's payment had to be carefully documented. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of thousands of clay tablets across Mesopotamia, many of them surprisingly ordinary. They record deliveries of barley, lists of livestock, contracts between merchants, tax payments, and employment records. While these documents may seem mundane, they reveal something extraordinary. More than 5,000 years ago, Sumerians had already developed an administrative system sophisticated enough to manage large populations with remarkable efficiency. One archive from the 3rd dynasty of Uruk contains tens of thousands of administrative tablets. Together, they paint a detailed picture of everyday government unlike almost any other ancient civilization. Officials tracked everything, from the number of sheep born each season to the exact amount of grain distributed to workers. Even wages looked very different from what we know today. Instead of receiving coins, most workers were paid with essential goods. Grain served as the foundation of the economy, but one item appears again and again on surviving tablets: beer. To modern ears, paying workers in beer sounds almost humorous, but for the Sumerians it made perfect sense. Beer was not considered a luxury or an occasional indulgence. It was a nutritious staple, consumed daily by nearly everyone. Brewed from barley, it was often safer to drink than untreated river water and provided calories, vitamins, and hydration. Records show that laborers, craftsmen, administrators, and priests all received carefully measured beer rations according to their rank and responsibilities. Higher-ranking officials received larger allocations, while children and lower-status workers received smaller portions. In effect, beer functioned as part of the salary system that kept the entire economy moving. Another surprising feature of Sumerian society challenges modern assumptions about women in the ancient world. Although Sumer was certainly not an equal society by today's standards, women possessed legal rights that were uncommon in many later civilizations. Historical records show women buying and selling property, managing businesses, inheriting wealth, appearing in legal contracts, and overseeing large temple estates. Some became influential priestesses who controlled significant economic resources. The high priestess of a major temple was not merely a religious figure. She could supervise land, labor, trade, and wealth on a scale comparable to powerful political leaders. As cities expanded, another profession became increasingly important: the scribe. Becoming a scribe required years of specialized education, and literacy was a rare skill. Students attended institutions known today as the Aduba, meaning House of Tablets. These schools were demanding, disciplined, and often unforgiving. Children spent countless hours copying symbols onto clay tablets with reed styluses. They memorized long lists of signs, practiced mathematics, learned accounting, and mastered complex writing techniques. Surviving school exercises reveal page after page filled with repeated characters, much like modern students practicing the alphabet. Some of the most fascinating discoveries are letters written by students themselves. They complain about strict teachers, long lessons, difficult assignments, and harsh punishments. In one text, a student describes being beaten for talking, arriving late, writing poorly, and breaking school rules. 5,000 years ago, children were already complaining about homework. Education was expensive and demanding, but those who succeeded entered one of the most respected professions in society. Scribes became administrators, accountants, diplomats, and advisors, whose work preserved nearly every aspect of Sumerian civilization. Their mathematical achievements were equally impressive. Unlike the decimal system most of the world uses today, Sumerians developed a number system based on 60. At first glance, this may seem strange, but it offered enormous practical advantages. Because 60 can be divided evenly by many different numbers, its influence survives everywhere around us. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you check the time or use a compass, you are unknowingly relying on mathematical concepts first developed in ancient Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. Innovation extended beyond mathematics. Many people associate the invention of the wheel with transportation, imagining the first wheeled carts rolling across dusty roads. Archaeological evidence suggests a different story. The earliest rotating wheels were likely used by potters to shape clay vessels more efficiently. Only later did people adapt the concept to wagons and carts, revolutionizing transport across the ancient world. For a civilization with almost no stone or timber, clay became the foundation of everything. Homes were built from sun-dried mud bricks. Temples rose from stacked bricks baked in kilns. Writing was pressed into clay tablets. Water pipes were made from clay. Storage jars, cooking pots, and countless everyday tools all came from the same humble material. What appeared to be a limitation became one of Sumer's greatest strengths. Their dependence on clay also explains why we know so much about them today. Papyrus decays, wood rots, cloth disappears. But when clay tablets were accidentally baked during fires or intentionally hardened in kilns, they became nearly indestructible. Thousands have survived beneath the sands for over 5 millennia, preserving voices that would otherwise have been lost forever. Those voices reveal another hidden truth rarely mentioned in history books. Sumer was not an isolated civilization. It was the center of an enormous international trading network that stretched across the ancient world. Merchants traveled by riverboats, donkey caravans, and ships sailing through the Persian Gulf. They imported copper from Oman, timber from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia, precious stones from Afghanistan, and luxury goods from lands so distant that many people had never seen them. Among the most mysterious trading partners mentioned in Sumerian texts was a place called Meluha. For generations, scholars debated where this distant land might have been. Today, most archaeologists believe Meluha referred to the Indus Valley civilization, located in parts of modern Pakistan and northwestern India. Evidence supporting this connection is remarkable. Indus seals have been discovered in Mesopotamian cities. Sumerian texts describe merchants arriving from Meluha with exotic products including ivory, hardwoods, gemstones, and beautifully crafted carnelian beads. These discoveries reveal that international commerce linked some of the world's earliest civilizations more than 4,000 years before the Silk Road reached its greatest importance. Trade brought wealth. Wealth brought ambition. And ambition brought conflict. As each city grew stronger, competition over fertile farmland, irrigation canals, trade routes, and political influence intensified. The cooperation that had once allowed civilization to flourish was gradually given way to rivalry. The world's first great cities were about to discover that building civilization was far easier than keeping the peace.